Tonight on Primetime, the United Nations top court has opened a landmark case into allegations of genocide in Myanmar over its treatment of the Rohingya minority. The proceedings in The Hague are being closely watched because the outcome could shape how genocide is argued and judged under international law, with political consequences stretching far beyond Southeast Asia. Justice may be slow, but at least now it's moving. Well, good evening. The United Nations top court has opened a landmark case into allegations of genocide against Myanmar over its treatment of the Rohingya minority. The case is expected to have wide legal and political implications beyond Southeast Asia.
The International Court of Justice opens hearings on Monday in a landmark case accusing Myanmar of committing genocide against its Rohingya Muslim minority. The case was filed in 2019 by the Gambia, a Muslim-majority West African nation which argues that Myanmar's 2017 military campaign in Rakhine State violated the 1948 Genocide Convention. The operation forced more than 730,000 Rohingya to flee to neighbouring Bangladesh, where refugees reported mass killings, rape and arson. A United Nations fact-finding mission later said the campaign included genocidal acts. Myanmar rejected the findings and denies accusations of genocide. It says its actions were a legitimate response to attacks by Rohingya militants. The hearings, which will last 3 weeks, mark the first time in more than a decade that the ICJ will hear a genocide case fully on its merits. Legal experts say the outcome could influence similar international law cases, including South Africa's petition against Israel over the war in Gaza. In 2020, the ICJ ordered Myanmar to take measures to prevent acts prohibited under the Genocide Convention. A final ruling is expected to take months or years. Around 1.2 million Rohingya refugees remain in overcrowded camps in Bangladesh, while international courts continue to investigate Myanmar's military leadership for possible crimes against humanity.
Okay, we'll take a short break now and we'll be back in just a few moments' time. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. Now for our first look this week at the world's top business stories. Andy Mioch is with us. Andy, what's on the agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, there's a lot. At the top of the week, we've seen safe haven assets hit all-time high prices. Certain AI chatbots are under global scrutiny over sexualized deepfakes, and there's also some news from the brewing and auto industry. So without further ado, first up, gold prices surged to an all-time high at the start of the week. Silver also hit its highest price ever as investors flocked to safe haven assets following the news on Trump administration's probe into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell.
Gold prices surged about 2% to an all-time high of $4,600 per ounce on Monday, while silver also set a new record as a criminal probe by the Trump administration into Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell sent investors scuttling back into the safe haven. Spot gold jumped 1.9% to $4,596 per ounce, after hitting a record high of $4,600 earlier in the session. US gold futures for February delivery gained 2.3% to $4,606. Wall Street futures dropped and the dollar fell by the most in 3 weeks on Monday as tensions between the Fed and the Trump administration escalated. The Trump administration threatened to indict Powell over congressional testimony he gave last summer, an action the Fed chair called a pretext for the administration to gain more influence over interest rates, which Trump wants cut dramatically. Major brokerages such as Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley expect two 25 basis point rate cuts, each in June and September. Trump said he is also weighing a range of strong responses, including military options to a violent crackdown on Iranian protests. Iran's unrest comes as Trump flexes US muscles internationally, having ousted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and discussing acquiring Greenland by purchase or force. Non-yielding assets like gold tend to do well in a low-interest rate environment and during geopolitical or economic uncertainties. Spot silver rose 5.5% to $84.3 per ounce after hitting an all-time high of $84.6 earlier in the day.
Still with news from the United States, Donald Trump said he might prevent ExxonMobil from investing in Venezuela after the oil giant's CEO described the country as uninvestable. This comes following Trump's push for the oil majors to invest $100 billion to revitalize the South American country's oil industry.
US President Donald Trump said on Sunday that he might block ExxonMobil from investing in Venezuela after the oil major's CEO called the country uninvestable during a White House meeting last week. Exxon CEO Darren Woods told Trump that Venezuela would need to change its laws before it could be an attractive investment opportunity. During the high-profile meeting on Friday, with at least 17 other oil executives, Trump had urged the group to spend $100 billion to revitalize Venezuela's oil industry in a meeting less than a week after US forces captured and removed Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro from power in a brazen overnight raid. Woods' skeptical remarks quickly emerged as the dominant headline, undercutting the White House's hopes of building momentum from its engagement with the world's most prominent oil executives. Exxon, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron, the three largest US oil producers, were for decades the most prominent partners of Venezuela's state oil company, PDVSA. The government of late President Hugo Chavez nationalized the industry between 2004 and 2007. And while Chevron negotiated deals to partner with PDVSA, ConocoPhillips and Exxon left the country and filed for prominent arbitration cases shortly after. Venezuela now owes over $13 billion collectively to ConocoPhillips and Exxon for the expropriations, according to court rulings.
In artificial intelligence regulation news, Elon Musk's Grok chatbot is now under investigation in the United Kingdom over sexualized AI imagery, following two bans in Southeast Asia over the weekend. This comes as Grok turned off its image generator for most users after a global outcry over the deepfakes and threats it might face fines and regulatory action.
Britain's media regulator launched an investigation into Elon Musk's X on Monday to determine whether allowing its Grok AI chatbot to produce sexually intimate deepfakes violated its duty to protect people in the UK from content that could be illegal. If Ofcom finds that X has broken the law, it can make it take steps to come into compliance. And if it does not, it can fine it up to 10% of its qualifying worldwide revenue. Meanwhile, Indonesia and Malaysia restricted access to Grok AI over the weekend, becoming the first countries to ban the artificial intelligence system over its generation of sexual content. The move by the Southeast Asian nations came as Musk's xAI, which owns Grok, decided on Friday to restrict the image generation feature for most users on the X social media platform. Users now need a paid subscription to generate and edit images, but several regulators around the globe, including in the UK, have criticised the move by xAI as insufficient.
Global smartphone shipments rose 2% year-on-year in 2025, with Apple leading the market, followed by Samsung and Xiaomi. The increase was driven by strong demand in emerging markets, but challenges are expected ahead, mainly due to chip shortages.
Global smartphone shipments rose 2% year-on-year in 2025. That's according to leading analyst Counterpoint Research. It said sales were lifted by stronger demand and economic strength in emerging markets. Apple led the market with a 20% share. Counterpoint said the US tech giant saw solid demand in emerging and mid-sized markets, and it enjoyed strong sales of the iPhone 17 series. Galaxy maker Samsung came second with a 19% share on modest shipment growth, while China's Xiaomi was third on a 13% share and supported by steady demand in emerging markets. Counterpoint said the global smartphone market is expected to soften this year due to chip shortages and rising component costs as chip makers focus on AI data centers over handsets.
In the brewing industry, Heineken has announced that its chief executive officer will step down after almost 6 years at the helm. The change in leadership comes as the brewer struggles with weakening demand and changing consumer preferences.
Heineken said on Monday its CEO Dolf van den Brink would step down on May 31st after nearly 6 years of leading the Dutch brewer. Van den Brink took over at the world's #2 beer maker during the COVID-19 pandemic. He has worked through a turbulent period for the firm since taking over. It was marked first by the pandemic and then by huge cost inflation. As well as falling sales that have hurt margins, the company's share price and investor returns. Van den Brink has agreed to remain available as an advisor for 8 months from June. He said now was the right moment for Heineken to appoint new leadership. The company set a new strategy covering the years until 2030 in October. But Heineken's shares fell almost 3% in early trade. Van den Brink is the latest in a string of consumer company CEOs to depart after a difficult few years for the sector. Consumer finances have come under strain from high costs of living. Brewers have struggled to sell more beer, with hopes of a sales revival repeatedly knocked off course by everything from bad weather to political uncertainty. Now, there are worries around the emergence of weight loss drugs that could hit food and drink sales, as well as shifting attitudes to drinking, especially among younger people.
And finally, in the automotive sector, Germany's Volkswagen was overtaken by Geely in sales in China in 2025 after losing its lead in that market to Build Your Dreams a year before. New industry data showed that foreign automakers are losing ground to Chinese rivals due to a slower shift to electric vehicles.
Volkswagen was overtaken by Geely Auto in sales in China last year, dropping to third place after losing its decade-long dominance in the world's largest auto market to BYD in 2024. Volkswagen's 2 joint ventures in China with state-owned FAW and SAIC Motor held a combined 10.9% share in terms of retail sales, down from 12.2% in 2024, China Passenger Car Association data showed on Monday. Geely Auto's share of its home market rose to 11% from 7.7% in 2025, while BYD's share fell to 14.7% from 16.2%. Legacy foreign automakers such as Volkswagen, General Motors and Toyota have ceded share to Chinese rivals due to a slower shift to electric vehicles, which Chinese consumers increasingly favor due to state subsidies.
And that is a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Guy, back to you.
Very good. Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll be taking a look at more news and analysis in depth here on Primetime. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Now let's go back to our top story tonight, and the United Nations top court has opened a landmark case into allegations of genocide against Myanmar over its treatment of the Rohingya minority. Now, the case is expected to have wide legal and political implications beyond Southeast Asia.
The International Court of Justice opens hearings on Monday in a landmark case accusing Myanmar of committing genocide against its Rohingya Muslim minority. The case was filed in 2019 by the Gambia, a Muslim-majority West African nation which argues that Myanmar's 2017 military campaign in Rakhine State violated the 1948 Genocide Convention. The The operation forced more than 730,000 Rohingya to flee to neighbouring Bangladesh, where refugees reported mass killings, rape and arson. A United Nations fact-finding mission later said the campaign included genocidal acts. Myanmar rejected the findings and denies accusations of genocide. It says its actions were a legitimate response to attacks by Rohingya militants. The hearings, which will last 3 weeks, mark the first time in more than a decade that the ICJ will hear a genocide case fully on its merits. Legal experts say the outcome could influence similar international law cases, including South Africa's petition against Israel over the war in Gaza. In 2020, the ICJ ordered Myanmar to take measures to prevent acts prohibited under the Genocide Convention. A final ruling is expected to take months or years. Around 1.2 million Rohingya refugees remain in overcrowded camps in Bangladesh, while international courts continue to investigate Myanmar's military leadership for possible crimes against humanity.
Well, joining me now is Mohammed Musa, a Rohingya refugee advocate, speaking to us from Camp 14 in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, right at the heart of the world's largest refugee settlement, where hundreds of thousands of Rohingya have lived since fleeing violence in Myanmar. And Mohammed, thank you very much indeed for taking the time and the effort to connect with us tonight. Just give us a sense, please, what is daily life like right now in Camp 14 in terms of safety, food and medical support?
Thank you very much for giving me a chance to share our perspective and the daily struggles of the Rohingya refugee in Bangladesh. We are 1.2 million Rohingya forcibly displaced peoples are living in Bangladesh in a very concentrated camps. So the daily life in camp is very difficult and uncertain. The safety is a constant concern, particularly women and children. The food support has been reduced over time. The rations are not enough for our daily life and for nutrition. Many families survive on a very limited meals. Malnutrition, especially among children and pregnant women, is a serious problem. If we said that medical service exists, but they are very overstressed. The clinics where they have lack of medicine, equipment, and a specialized care for serious illness or emergencies, access to hospital outside the camp is limited and often delayed too.
A desperate and incredibly difficult situation. When you hear then, Mohammed, that the World Court is examining genocide allegations, what does that mean for people living there? Is it hope, fear, frustration, or something else?
For most of the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, it means a mixture of hope and frustration. It's a hope because at last the world is recognizing that what happened to us in Myanmar, in Rakhine State, that was genocide, not just a conflict. It gives victims a sense that their suffering is not forgotten. But there is also frustration because justice mechanisms is very slow, while courts delivered, our people remain persecuted, stateless, confined to camps, and unable to return home safely. Many fear that legal process will take years, while a whole generation grows up without a future where they can hope for a dignified future.
I think it's fair to say, Mohammed, that many people outside of these camps struggle perhaps to understand what the Rohingya have really gone through in Myanmar. What do you most want the world to know? What is your message to let everybody know, to understand exactly what the people have been going through?
I want the world to know that the Rohingya did not flee by choice. We were systematically persecuted, Our villages were burnt, women were raped, children were killed, and families were forced to run for their lives. This was not violence, it was a planned genocidal campaign by the Myanmar military and the authority to erase our identity and to deny our existence in Rakhine State in Arakan. Even the mass killing will live under apartheid like conditions without citizenship, freedom of movement, education, or dignity.
And do you think that the refugees, therefore, feel forgotten by the international community? And if so, Mohammed, what kind of support is most urgently needed now? We have had a delay on the line. It's very difficult to connect with you where you are. We may be having a few technical difficulties, so just bear with us for a couple of moments. We'll try and keep connected to Mr. Musa. Mr. Musa, are you still on the line?
Yes,
Mr. Musa, welcome back. We had a short technical hitch there, but thank you very much. I just wanted to know.
yes, many refugees feel forgotten. Global attention has shifted to other crises, and the funding is decreasing, but our suffering has not ended. The most urgent needs the political solution for the Rohingya peoples. The yeah,
Okay, we've had one or two connection problems there. We are extremely grateful to Mr. Musa for connecting with us and telling us those real life stories of the very difficult situation that many, many people are in. Okay, we're now going to go to a story about Uber. And with soaring assets, we'll take a short break and we'll be back with you very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese recalls Parliament early for gun and hate speech laws. Now, he says the new laws would make hateful and divisive conduct illegal and reaffirm Australia's commitment to protecting social cohesion. Well, the move comes after a deadly shooting on Bondi Beach last month.
Australia's National Parliament will cut short its summer break to pass laws tackling hate speech after the Bondi Beach shooting last month. Parliament is expected to sit next Monday and Tuesday, with the government aiming to pass legislation shortly afterwards. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says both houses of Parliament would reconvene to hold a condolence motion for the victims, first responders and members of the public who intervened. He said the government would introduce a package of reforms aimed at combating anti-Semitism, hate and extremism.
The bill is the Combating Anti-Semitism, Hate and Extremism Bill. It's a comprehensive package of reforms which creates serious offences for hate preachers and leaders seeking to radicalise young Australians. It increases the penalties for hate crimes offences. The legislation will also set up the National Guns Buyback Scheme, bringing Australia's world-leading gun laws into the 21st century and getting guns off our streets. As I've said before, there are more guns now in Australia than there were at the time of the Port Arthur massacre. That is not good enough. The terrorists at Bondi Beach had hatred in their minds, but guns in their hands. This law will deal with both, and we do need to deal with both of these issues.
The move comes after the Bondi Beach mass shooting on the 14th of December at a Jewish Hanukkah celebration killed 15 people. The attack renewed calls for stronger action against anti-Semitism and gun violence. Police say the alleged father and son attackers were inspired by the Islamic State militant group.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz met on Monday to push for deeper economic and security ties between South Asian nations and Europe's largest economy.
India and Germany announced a wide range of initiatives spanning defence, trade and technology on the first day of Chancellor Merz's visit. In order to strengthen defence industrial cooperation, both nations also signed a declaration focused on co-development and co-production. After the bilateral talks, Modi noted that Germany is India's most important trading partner in the European Union.
The close cooperation between economies like India and Germany is very important for humanity. Increasing businesses and close ties has given new energy to our strategic partnership. Our bilateral trade has reached at its highest level and has crossed the $50 billion mark.
In his turn, Friedrich Merz also touched boosting partnership between countries.
Highly dynamic India and technologically advanced Germany share essential interests, and that is precisely what we are building on. Against this backdrop, it is of particular strategic importance that we deepen the cooperation between our defence industries. This strengthens both sides. It also helps to reduce India's dependence, for example, on Russia.
Merz's two-day visit to India, his first since taking office, comes weeks ahead of a scheduled EU-India summit in New Delhi. The German Chancellor also commenced his visit to India with a splash of colour by attending the International Kite Festival 2026. He and Narendra Modi jointly inaugurated the festival and were seen interacting with participants, soaking in the festive mood as kites filled the sky.
President Trump says Cuba should cut a deal with Washington, warning the island will no longer receive oil shipments or financial support. Now, Cuba's leadership has hit back quickly, but on the streets of Havana, the reaction is far more divided.
US President Donald Trump warns Cuba will no longer receive oil or financial support unless they make a deal with Washington. President Trump made the comment in his Truth Social platform on Sunday, adding that Havana should make a deal before it is too late. He accuses Cuba of having long relied on Venezuelan oil and money in exchange for providing security services to Caracas. Trump's comments come amid heightened US pressure on the region following Washington's recent military action in Venezuela and a strict US oil blockade on the country. Venezuela has been Cuba's main oil supplier, but shipping data shows that no cargoes have departed for the island since the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro by US forces earlier this month. Cuba's leadership swiftly rejected Trump's remarks. President Miguel Diaz-Canel said the United States had no moral authority to force Cuba into a deal, insisting the country is sovereign and independent. In a series of posts on social media, Diaz-Canel blamed Cuba's economic hardship on decades of US sanctions and warned that the island would defend itself. Meanwhile, on the streets of Havana, Cubans' reactions were mixed. Some residents expressed frustration, saying ordinary people are bearing the brunt of the crisis.
It seems to me that Diaz-Canel, Raúl Castro and the whole committee have to make a decision because it is the people who are suffering. Now look, find out where that oil was going. Where was the oil if Cuba doesn't have it? There's no electricity here, there's no power here, there's no gas here, no liquefied gas, there's nothing here. So it seems to me that where is the oil that Venezuela or Mexico was sending? Where is it? So yes, change is needed, but quickly, hopefully, tomorrow.
Others rejected Trump's warning and said Cuba would not back down.
That doesn't scare me. Not at all. At no point does that scare me, because I'm prepared. The Cuban people are prepared for anything, any situation that may arise, for everything. We are prepared for that.
Another resident said Cuba would be heavily affected by any further pressure, but insisted the country should not be compared to Venezuela.
Trump knows perfectly well that he has to find a solution, because he can't just take over Cuba like that. And if he went down that route with Venezuela, it's because there were shady things going on. But we're not to blame for any of that. Cuba is Cuba, and Venezuela is different. And yes, we will be affected, quite a lot.
Cuba relies almost entirely on imported crude and fuel to keep power stations and transport running. Rolling blackouts have become routine. Food and medicine shortages have deepened, and a record number of Cubans have left the island in recent years, mainly for the United States.
Well, joining us next is John Kavlik, president of the US-Cuba Trade and Economic Council, an organization that tracks commercial ties and economic policy between Washington and Havana, at a moment when relations are again clearly under strain. John, it's great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. President Trump has always seen himself as the deal maker in chief, hasn't he? The world's greatest deal maker. But in this context, when he says Cuba should make a deal, what does he actually mean, do you think?
He probably isn't 100% certain as to what he means nor what he wants. But looking at his trajectory from his first term into now a year plus a week into his, or nearing a year into his second term, we sort of have a landscape that we can look at in terms of Israel, Gaza, in terms of Iran, in terms of the conflicts that he's been involved in, and most recently with Venezuela. And that is, when he's saying make a deal, making a deal about type of government, type of governance is not at the top of the list. So a country can remain a dictatorship, an authoritarian model, a communist model, as long as they run it well, in how he defines run it well. But as long as they make the trains run on time and people have what they need, he really isn't concerned about democracy and about human rights and transparency and rule of law. He's more concerned about the options, and he's more concerned with the business. So when he says to Cuba, make a deal, he's primarily channeling what we first saw him channel with respect to Gaza, where that infamous video of he and Prime Minister Netanyahu superimposed on lounge chairs in Gaza. And the goal was to make Gaza the new Riviera. Of course, where the 2.3 million Gazans would go, that really wasn't a big concern. So when he's talking about making a deal, he's thinking business. And also there are some happenings that that I follow, the people that follow Cuba follow, but the general public isn't aware of. And that is, there are two cases before the Supreme Court that are scheduled for decision soon. And they're part of what was called the Libertad Act, which basically allowed companies that had assets expropriated by the Cuban government in 1959, 1960, to go to court and sue whoever was using those assets. And there are two cases that have made it to the Supreme Court. One involves $400 million that was awarded to a plaintiff that ran a dock in Havana, and that's for 4 very large cruise lines, $100 million each, for using that port. And the other is ExxonMobil. They want to sue 2 Cuban companies, so they need to get, in essence, permission to pierce this sovereign immunity. But the important part about this is they both involve money, and they both involve monies that were taken. And that's the Venezuelan model, which is, Trump has said, companies had assets stolen. We want those companies made whole. So number one, look at it like that. And then number two, tourism potential.
And John, when it comes to making a deal, obviously leverage is very important. Of course, President Trump is president of the world's most powerful country, the world's #1 economy. But beyond that, the US doesn't directly bankroll Cuba. You've mentioned some of the connections financially between the two, but what are those practical, specific levers that Washington is going to be looking to pull to bring Cuba to the table? Is it sanctions? Is it remittances? Is it banking regulation? Just give us a sense of the buttons that you think they'll be pushing.
All three of those buttons, as well as potential tariffs, but not necessarily on Cuba, but countries that engage with Cuba. So financial sanctions are the weapon. It basically is the neutron bomb of the business community. So it causes a lot of destruction, but not actually destroying physical assets. And in terms of Cuba, the U.S. has had, by law, by regulation, by policy, sanctions that impact Cuba directly in terms of what kind of banking it can do, who it can do banking with, whenever it involves the use of the dollar. And that's how the U.S. makes these sanctions work. If any bank anywhere in the world is using dollars, the U.S. government takes the position that we can control what you're doing using those dollars. And then also the secondary sanctions, the extraterritorial nature of U.S. policy. One example of that, when the first Trump administration returned Cuba to the list of state sponsors of terrorism, the Biden administration then took them off. Trump administration put them back on. But one of the big implications of that was there is a visa waiver program, ESTID, and that basically there are a number of countries where you don't need a visa to come to the United States. Anyone that goes to a country listed as a state sponsor of terrorism is no longer eligible for that visa waiver. So that means if you're a UK tourist, if you're a French tourist, if you're a Canadian tourist, and you're a Spanish tourist, and you're thinking of going to Cuba, well, you may go to Cuba, but then try to get to the United States, and you're going into a very long queue that now the rules have changed, where now the consular officer can say, I think you're fat, you could have a problem, so I'm going to let you in.
John, you know the country, you know Havana very well. You've spent time there on the ground. As the screws tighten, as the pressure of this sort of activity from Washington starts to bite, what hits first on the island? Is it fuel shortages, hyperinflation, blackouts? Just give us a sense of the impact to the people, life and businesses on the ground.
Yeah, you hit basically the top three. Cuba does import almost all of its oil, and it's primarily heavy crude. What they produce is high sulfur heavy crude, mostly used for power generation, but they don't nearly produce enough, so they import it. So when you cut that off or you reduce it, Cuba gets hit immediately because not only do they have less fuel, but their energy infrastructure is woefully inadequate. Most of it is USSR generation built, and it hasn't been maintained, and a lot of it's offline. And when they do get it back online, it then breaks down very quickly. They don't, have really natural gas production, and then the importation of food product for the Cuban people into the ration program, that goes through the government. So their ability to fund that, their ability to fund medical product imports. So everything just, begins this slow motion collapse. Now, in your setup piece, you had some Cuban nationals saying, we're prepared for this. They are very good at suffering. It's not something they're happy with, but they're almost professional sufferers, because the Cuban government generally has never provided everything that they need. And so when they're saying, we're sort of prepared for what can come, this is worse. I was around during the special period, 93, 94, 95, when the USSR transitioned away from Cuba and all of its support basically evaporated very quickly. This has been far worse because this has been rolling now for 3-4 years. And they had COVID, which decimated tourism. It never really came back. Then the Trump administration came in and put sanctions back on. Also, U.S. companies withdrew because of restrictions. And then you've had this continuing economic issues that they've faced because they refuse to change. Because every morning they wake up and President Diaz-Canel, the telephone rings and he hopes it's Brezhnev on the other line from the USSR saying, Miguel, this has all been a horrible nightmare. Everything's okay. Don't worry about it. But that just isn't being realistic. And so President Trump, when he's talking about, making a deal, he has leverage now to force them to do what they say they don't want to do. And they're probably going to basically have to heed. I would suggest this is what to watch for. You may see a gentleman by the name of Mauricio Claver Caron, his name be about. He was with the National Security Council first term. He was the architect of the first round of sanctions. And he knows what he's doing. If the Trump administration wants to send a really hard message to Cuba, say, don't screw around because we're sending in our bull, he'll go. But my money would probably be on Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner again, because they live in Florida, they know real estate, and President Trump has always talked about Cuba could be, the golden, of the Caribbean again. And he looks at Cuba sort of as a Gaza that isn't yet leveled and ready for redevelopment. But I would say watch Mr. Kushner, watch Mr. Witkoff, watch President Trump start talking about redeveloping Cuba, its tourism, that's how to make it money. And then lastly, he's going to start to talk about Cuba owes U.S. companies about $9 billion for assets that were expropriated without compensation. And President Trump is going to be keying on that. The problem is Venezuela has money to pay. They've got oil that they can sell. Cuba doesn't have anything. Cuba is everything coming in, nothing really going out.
So a fascinating picture you paint, John, of a resilient people, a very fragile economy. Under this sort of pressure, are there nevertheless external partners that Cuba could realistically rely on to help cushion the blow?
There are, but they won't. The traditional partners, of course, Venezuela, number one. Both not only in energy, but also Cuba providing healthcare workers, which the Venezuelan government paid a lot of money for. So, a lot of that is going to be unwound. Then you have Mexico more recently, where President Claudia Sheinbaum, has been providing oil to Cuba. Trump administration is not happy with it. They've been decreasing the amount that's going. And within the next months, both Canada and Mexico are going to begin discussions on renegotiating their three-way trade agreement. And it's absolutely a certainty that Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is of Cuban descent, along with President Trump, are going to pressure Mexico to also reduce or eliminate their energy supplies to Cuba. China is not doing anything. China's owed tens of billions of dollars from Venezuela that Venezuela was paying back in oil. And now the Trump administration is suggesting that deal's over. So now China's going to find out what it's going to do with all that money that it's owed from Venezuela. Russia is not going to be coming to their aid. No one's going to be coming to provide the level of assistance Cuba needs. There may be some, humanitarian, like where some countries will say, look, we can't have a potential Haiti in Cuba. We can't have people starving. We can't have disease. We can't have, no electricity, hurricane season, the summer's coming up. But I think the administration feels that they've got Cuba sort of, like a python grip, and they're going to keep squeezing because President Trump doesn't have issues relating to Florida in terms of Cuban Americans aren't going to tell him, let up, don't squeeze too hard, because over 60 years, the distance between Cubans on the island and Cubans in Miami is more elastic. You know, it used to be fathers and sons and husbands and wives. Now it's cousins, second cousins, and they're just more distant. So there's not that emotional attachment. And then also with his base, his MAGA base, he promised them no wars. But with Maduro, he said, we're not in a war with Maduro. I went in and grabbed a drug dealer. And so it's not a war. We're at war with drug dealers, but we're not war with a country. And with Cuba, they're going to, you know, basically take the same position. And his MAGA, Make America Great Again base, he will say to them, I define what MAGA is, and this is within what MAGA should support.
So in that case, John, in terms of a workable path to try and stabilize relations, a way to negotiate out of this, it sounds like that's very unlikely, that anything other than just giving in to the Python's grip, as you describe it, will just be unacceptable to Washington.
It's going to depend. You know, President Trump he's very much focused with performance, performative nature, optics, and also being perceived as a winner. You know, grabbing Maduro, a solid win. Only some injuries to the U.S. troops. No U.S. troops died. They got Mr. and Mrs. Maduro. They're now living at the Manhattan Detention Center. Astounding. So he's able to say, this is why we spend $1 trillion on military. And so he's going to look at Cuba and say, do I really need to give them anything to get what I want? And the Cubans, because they're not seen as sympathetic and empathetic, because Trump's okay with communist governments, Vietnam and China, because they're well run. They know how to get out of the way of the private sector. And when he looks at Cuba, he says, these people, it should be a gold mine for tourism. It should be a gold mine selling rum, even though alcohol consumption is lower. It should be a gold mine selling cigars. It has nickel and cobalt, which is needed. So this should be a no-brainer. 2 million Cuban Americans in Miami going forth. The private sector should be robust. But the Cuban government is anachronistic. They're hugging the mid 20th century, and they're hugging a dream that was never viable. Even during Fidel's best days, the Cuban economy couldn't function on its own. It needed help from the then USSR. So I don't think President Trump's going to be in a real forgiving mood. I don't think Secretary Rubio is. And then you've got members of the House and Senate in Florida who are to the right of President Trump, to the right of Secretary Rubio. They're going to have to sort of claw them back from, let's send in the Marines, let's attack them, and all this other craziness. But I think that you're going to see the president just make the case that you, very Zelensky-esque, you don't have the cards, President Miguel Diaz-Canel. All you have is a deck of cards that represents suffering. I can make your suffering worse. I can make your suffering less, but no one is going to save you except Donald Trump, so make a deal.
John, how much of this do you think is specific to Cuba versus a message to the region? Do you think Trump's using Havana as a warning shot to other governments in Latin America?
Absolutely. When he went into Venezuela, it was a political pool table, and the bank shot was hitting Cuba, and that was known all along, and that was a plan because it was known and it was easy to make happen. I mean, you can Venezuela, Cuba suffers. It's A plus B equals C, so it's linear. And then for the other countries, President Trump, did threaten President of Colombia, did insult the president of Brazil, did insult, the president of Mexico. But generally, he's sort of walked that back, said now he's going to meet with the president of Colombia. Some of the other presidents in the Americas were, sort of cautious. But there's no question, someone like Nicaragua, where you have the Mr. and Mrs. Ortega, president and vice president, respectively, they went and released some prisoners the other day. So they were trying to get ahead of things. Now, Nicaragua's always been just a strange character in all this, because they truly have done some awful things to their people and to their country, but yet the U.S. has full diplomatic relations, full commercial economic relations. So it's always been sort of strange. But I think if you're the Ortega family in Nicaragua, you're watching and you're saying, all right, this guy can focus on several places at once. And so President Trump, he's redefined what power is. In his mind, a powerful country is based on three components. It's how big is your GDP, so how much economic force do you exert? How much do you spend on your military? So how big is your defense budget, and what are you willing to use it for, other than look nice at parades? And then lastly is population. Number of people you have that you have as consumers, you have as travelers, and you have as potential people serving in the military. So he looks at those three, looks at the top 10 in GDP, top 10 in defense spending, top 10 in population. And it's a very small group that share all three at a high level. And so, they're all watching to see just how aggressive he wants to be. Everyone's watching the calendar. November, we have the midterm elections in the United States Congress, the House and Senate. Traditionally, the occupant of the White House, the party occupying the White House, loses one house. Usually it's the House. But no one should think that if this president does lose the House or the Senate or both, that he's not going to continue to use every tool of the presidency that we know about, and then try to create some new ones and test them in the courts that other governments need to be very careful about, because he will use tariffs, he will use sanctions, he will use visa restrictions because he likes it.
John, we appreciate your analysis as always, and thank you for joining us from London.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Iran's unrest as Tehran blames the US and Israel, and President Trump weighs possible responses. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Human rights activists on the ground say the unrest in Iran has now killed around 500 people. They report more than 10,000 arrests in just 2 weeks of violent protests. Well, Tehran is blaming the United States and Israel for fueling the turmoil and is warning of possible retaliation. President Trump is now due to receive a briefing on potential responses.
The US-based, Iran-focused human rights group says it's verified the deaths of 544 protesters and 48 security personnel in Iran, with more than 10,600 people arrested in 2 weeks of unrest, according to its latest figures, from activists inside and outside the country. Deputy Director Skylar Thompson says the death toll may rise further. HRA is still investigating over 500 additional cases. Thompson says if those cases are confirmed, the number of dead could exceed 1,000. Iran's government has blamed the unrest on the United States and Israel. State media has called for a nationwide rally on Monday. Officials described the protests as terrorist actions led by foreign powers. On Sunday, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf issued a warning. He said Iran would target US and Israeli bases if Washington launches military action. The United States is now stepping up contingency planning. President Donald Trump is expected to receive a briefing on Tuesday. The briefing will cover military, cyber, and economic options.
There seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it, and we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination.
So far, the Pentagon says it has not repositioned forces for an immediate strike. President Trump says he is in contact with Iranian opposition leaders. He also claims Iranian officials requested talks on Saturday. Trump added he will speak to Elon Musk about restoring internet access in Iran. The protests began on December 28th, driven by rising living costs. Iran has announced 3 days of national mourning in memory of those killed during recent unrest. President Masoud Pezeshkian says people have legitimate demands, but he warned against what he called enemy attempts to destabilize the country.
Iran's authorities are now pushing back against the protest movement, blaming foreign actors for the violence and rejecting claims that the unrest is homegrown. Speaking in Tehran, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi accused President Donald Trump of encouraging instability and said the government has since reasserted control.
Mr. Trump, the President of the United States, had said that if people are killed, we will come and intervene. But what was important was that, because of his comments, elements seeking to create chaos went after increasing the death toll, in the hope of possibly drawing the United States into intervening. From January 10th until today, we are in the next phase, in which the situation has come under control.
Well, joining us now is Mr. Shayan Arya, an Iranian political activist and commentator based in Seattle. Now, he is described in public bios as the founder and general secretary of the new Constitutionalist Party of Iran, part of a constitutionalist opposition trend in exile that argues Iran needs a fundamental political reset. Mr. Arya, good to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's start with the important human picture, if we can. When you see the reports of hundreds killed, thousands detained, what's your sense of what's really going on from the people on the ground inside Iran tonight?
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be with you and your audience. Well, first of all, the reports that we are getting, the number of casualties and people killed by the Islamic regime's, hooligans, is far more than 500, and now it's reached thousands right now. We get various numbers from 2,000 up to even 5,000. So the numbers are rising, and it's very concerning. But one thing we have to remember is that all the reports that we are getting, all the video clips that we are getting, they show no indication as to the demonstrations kind of cooling down or people backing up, and it's continuing. And this uprising against the Islamic regime has nothing to do with foreign influence. It has nothing to do with Israel. It has nothing to do with America, as the regime wants to portray them. It has grown out of 47 years of mismanagement of the country, 47 years of brutal suppression of the Iranian people, 47 years of looting the country, leaving the Iranians desperate economically, socially, and in every aspect. And 47 years of undelivered promises for improvement that the Islamic regime has not been able to do. Not only that, not only they haven't been able to deliver on their promises, they have done exactly the opposite in every aspect. So the notion that this uprising is somehow connected to America or Israel or anybody else is just ludicrous. It's homegrown, and it's genuinely Iranian. These are Iranians who are fed up with this regime, and they want to change this regime and have a better future ahead of them.
Do you think, Shayan, that there's any danger that in the West, in the US, in Western Europe, that the state of affairs before 1979 has been unrealistically romanticized? I mean, I was 3 years of age in 1979, so I have no recollection of it. But I have certainly seen in recent weeks this sense of a presentation of, things were fine, people were free, and then they turned bad. And actually, there were also conflicting stories that if you were not part of the elite during that period, that actually there were all sorts of oppressive things going on beneath the surface of the lavish parties and sort of fashionable outfits on the streets. So is there a danger that we oversimplify life before 1979?
Well, actually, there's no danger because it's not. Nobody is oversimplifying what was in Iran before 1979. It's the Iranian people who have, through their experience for the past 47 years, have come to realize that what they had before 1979 compared to what they had before and what they got afterwards. And also when they compare it to the period with all the other countries around Iran, and even in some other countries, they realized that it was the best thing that they could have. And now it's not just the nostalgia. It's this feeling and this realization that what they had before under the Pahlavi dynasty was great compared to what they got afterwards, has come out of 47 years of experience, 47 years of trying different ways that the the late Shah groups and movements promised them that if they go and follow their guidelines, follow and support their policies, their lives will improve. And not only it hasn't, it's gotten much worse than before. So attributing this sense of pro-Pahlavi sentiments that is widespread and it's almost universal in Iran to just a nostalgia or just a oversimplification is not really accurate. It's based on data. It's based on collective memory of Iranian people. It's based on, as I said, 47 years of experience of trying everything that the anti-Pahlavi crowd had to offer. Iranians, time and time again, they tried to follow their leads, the anti-Pahlavi groups, all of them, all these so-called Republicans, and they did it. They followed them. They tried their solutions, and each and every one of them failed. So now they have realized that what they had before was great, and it was the best thing that they could get, and now they want it back. That's the reality.
Okay, let's turn to the unrest itself. I mean, it's spread very quickly. Do you think now that this is something that has turned into a deeper, direct challenge to the system itself?
Yes, I do believe so, because if you pay attention, it's not the first time that we've had unrest and uprisings in Iran, but this time there are several things that are totally different from the previous ones. One is that in the previous uprisings, people were asking something of the regime, different things, either their votes to be counted, their economic situation improved, different things from the regime. This time, they are not demanding anything from the regime. And that indicates to me, and everybody who is watching this closely, it indicates that they have totally given up on the regime. And they know by their experience and by the situations that they are living in, that this regime is incapable of delivering anything for them, even basics. As you know, if you follow Iran's situation in terms of environmental issues, water issues, energy issues, everything, runaway inflations, sagging standards of living, and all of that you will realize that people have given up. And they said that these people, this system, this regime cannot deliver anything for us. So therefore, now they are not demanding anything. Their only demand is that this regime to be changed. The second difference is that in the previous uprisings, they didn't call for any particular person to overthrow this regime. Now they are. They are chanting His Highness Reza Pahlavi's name. They call him the next Shah. They want him back. And it's not only limited to small groups in one city or the other. All the clips that we are getting all across the country, people are chanting Pahlavi's name. They are demanding his return. And this is totally different. And also, following them, if you follow every single demonstrations by Iranians outside of Iran, all across America, Canada, Australia, Europe, London, everywhere, people are, again, chanting Pahlavi's name because they genuinely believe that he is the solution for this crisis. They want him to lead the country. They want him to, head the transition period, and this is totally different. In the past, there wasn't like this. People were not chanting. We always knew that His Highness is very popular in Iran, but to this extent, even we are surprised, I should tell you. Every single clip that we are getting, from small towns to large cities, people are chanting his name, and they are not calling for anybody else except for him.
And Cheyenne, Tehran, as you know, is blaming the US and Israel. Give me your sense of the extent to which you feel there has been involvement from the US. And I mean, it would be unrealistic, wouldn't it, to say that there's been absolutely no involvement, or is that what you're suggesting?
Well, to be honest, I'm not aware of any direct involvement by the US. I don't think they are involved in that way. But the same thing with Israel. But what I can tell you is that the 12-day war that Israel conducted with the help of US at the last day have shown something to the Iranian people. That was a turning point. And the turning point was that Iranians realized that for the past 47 years, the regime has been lying about their military power. All of the resources that they said and justified pouring into their military to defend the country, and they were boasting that we are so powerful that from Mediterranean all the way to Afghanistan, to Yemen, to all over the place, we are so powerful that they don't dare to even, look at us. All of these things were just nonsense. So if they had any effect on these uprisings, was an indirect effect. Namely, they showed to the people that this is a tiger, a paper tiger. They have no power. And everything they have been telling you, the Iranian people, have been a lie. And that has had a great impact on Iranian psyche, because they realized that this regime, despite their propaganda, despite their threats, they are not really that powerful. And if so, my take is that if they had any thing to do with these riots, was an indirect one, by showing to the Iranian people that this regime in reality is much weaker than they've been told or they have come to believe. And that psychologically had a great impact on the population.
Let's just talk for a moment about the proposition, the offer to the people that, as you described, that the new Shah may put to the people. How different would it be to the previous ruling party that the country had before 1979? Would it be more modern, more egalitarian? There were criticisms, analysts have voiced criticisms that it was very difficult during that period if you did not subscribe specifically to languages, identities, that it was some ethnic minorities found life tricky. Would the new Shah have a slightly more egalitarian attitude to ruling?
Well, first of all, we have to realize that times are different. As I said, you have to compare every period with its own, realities. That's one thing. Second of all, His Highness Reza Pahlavi is a totally democratic person. And that's, in fact, one of the things that is very appealing to the people is the fact that he has been consistent in his demand that, first of all, the future system of government will be decided by the Iranian people through a free referendum. So he's not in it for restoration of the monarchy. He is there to get rid of this regime, as he has said time and time again, that he is not, his aim is not to gain power or restore the monarchy. It's the will of the people. Whatever they want is going to happen in the future. And even he has gone as far as saying that even if people vote for a monarchy, the only condition that I will accept any role to play in it is that its framework is totally democratic. Otherwise, I will not accept to play the role of the king. So I have no doubt in my mind that the future regime will be far more democratic than what we have today. And it will be far more in tune with the will of the people. And no Iranians that I know, I mean, there are some, of course, but most ordinary Iranians, they are not worried about the future monarchy, whether it's going to be oppressive or it's not going to be democratic or anything like that. And all the ethnic minorities, if you really look at it, their conditions were far, far, far better under the monarchy than it is under this Islamic regime. And I have no doubt that in the future, the conditions of all minorities in Iran, whether ethnic or religious or what have you, will be far more democratic and far better than what they have, what it is today.
Okay, finally, let's just turn to the precarious nature of the current geopolitical situation. Things are very delicate. President Trump is clearly the most powerful man in the world, but nevertheless, there are many who feel nervous about his execution of foreign policy. From your point of view, what would you like to see him do next, and what would you say he must not do now?
Well, he must not, as far as I'm concerned, he must not give the impression that he's making a deal behind Iranian people's back with this brutal regime. That's the first and foremost thing. And second of all, he has promised time and time again that if the regime starts killing Iranian innocent demonstrators, he will do something about it. And he will make sure that the regime, not the Iranian people, not the country, will pay for it. All we want for him is to deliver on his promise.
Well, we thank you very much.
Nobody is asking America to bring troops on the ground. Nobody is asking for a widespread attack all across the country. But what most people want in Iran is for America to do whatever it can to weaken the regime and hit their ability to kill the Iranian people. Now, what for it may take, I don't know. I don't know. But this is what most people want and expect from America. And America, and especially President Trump, he's very popular among Iranians, to be honest. And most Iranians, they don't have the concerns that some other countries or some other people around the globe may have about him. Iranians are not nervous about him. In fact, he's very popular in Iran. In fact, he became very popular ever since that he killed General Qasim Soleimani, because he was very much a big part of this regime. And ever since that operation, President Trump is very popular, and his popularity has grown. And that's what I can say. I don't know. Iranians, in general, they don't have that concern about him.
Mr. Arya, we thank you for your analysis and very much for joining us from Seattle in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at what Iran's unrest could mean for Azerbaijan, from border security and cross-border ties to Tehran's regional posture in the days ahead. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime. Tonight, Iran is facing its most serious wave of unrest in years, with human rights groups reporting a sharp rise in deaths and mass arrests, while Tehran blames outside powers for stoking the violence. For Azerbaijan, the stakes are immediate. Iran is a powerful neighbour with deep cross-border links, security sensitivities, and a relationship with Baku that has swung between tension and tactical cooperation. So what does this instability mean for Iran's posture abroad and for Azerbaijan's security, diplomacy and border stability in the days ahead? Well, joining me now to discuss this in more detail is A News' Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orkan Amashov. Orkan, great to have you in the studio.
Great to be here.
Before we start on this, just want to reflect on that interview with Cheyenne Arya. He was absolutely resolute that any return of the new Shah, as he put it, would be very similar to the old Shah, and his impression was that actually under that old regime, ethnic minority groups were well taken care of, that things generally sort of were running a lot better than the government post-79, and that it was pretty much all welcomed by the people. Now, that is not the analysis of many, is it?
Indeed. Before 1979, before the revolution of 1979, Iran had many problems. The problems in terms of the governance. The Shah was not particularly liked by many sections of society, and that's the reason ultimately he lost power. Had he been very powerful and very loved, he would have probably retained his power. And one of the reasons why United Kingdom and United States back then did not support him last minute, because their resources were quite limited, and probably they did not want to give credence to their critics of the Shah of Iran as a Western-supported monarch, so that they were very careful at the time. Well, Iran is a fascinating country, and it's got a fascinating history, of course, and Azerbaijan has played an important role. They contributed massively to the Iranian monarchy, dominating Iran for centuries. We know that 500 years ago, when Iran was ultimately unified under Shah Ismail Safavi, the ruling class were Azerbaijanis, were Turkic-speaking Azerbaijanis. The palace was Azerbaijani. They were dominating the multiple vital elements of the state apparatus. But of course, later things have changed, and the Persian character of the state was kind of enforced. But a reality is that before Pahlavis came to power in 1925, Iran was a failed state, in particular during the First World War. Certain sections of the country were controlled by Brits and by British, certain parts by Russia, and Pahlavis brought a certain degree of dignity, the restored centrality, but and there was a secular, modern, Persian-centered identity that they had reinforced throughout those decades up until 1979. Azerbaijanis, naturally, and as many other ethnic minorities, suffered massively because they were deprived of their own schools. Because Pahlavi approach to the Iran was based on the idea of Persian-centered nationalization and centralization. It might have been good for many Iranians at the time, in particular for elites, in particular those who forced to leave country in 1979, but it wasn't necessarily a lovely picture for many other people, including ethnic Azerbaijanis who were effectively deprived of their own identity. Because if you listen to Iranian monarchies, you would see they talk about Iran as one nation. They disregard ethnic minorities, and this effectively tells you what will happen to those Azerbaijanis if some form of transmogrification, some form of transition to or retransition back to monarchy could happen. Iran is a very complicated country. We're not entirely sure to what extent the supporters of the ousted Shah's son are there, to what extent he would be able to command confidence, because there are many Iranian nationalists, not necessarily ethnic minorities, who are against the return of monarchy. Therefore, from Azerbaijan's perspective as a nation, of course, if we talk about Baku, the Republic of Azerbaijan, first of all, Azerbaijan wants stability. Unpredictability is very dangerous. It effectively means that borders will not be safe. The spillover effect, that should be contained. Migrant flows to Azerbaijan, that needs to be contained. It's a massive problem. But at the same time, of course, if things go in an escalatory trajectory, if Iran indeed is being transformed into a failed state, Azerbaijan will need to take into account these realities and will need to protect its own national interests, of course.
Yeah, I mean, a complex country, complex relationship, as you've described, between the two countries. Now, what, as this delicate situation now unfolds, what is Baku watching out for? Is it border security? Is it political positioning? Give us the view of the diplomats in Baku. What are they? What's on their radar?
Well, Azerbaijan needs to make sure whatever it says and whatever it does is fully in line with the fundamental principles and norms of international law. Because Azerbaijan sorted out its own problems by means of application of international law. Therefore, Iran's territorial integrity is absolutely vital. Whatever happening in Iran is Iran's internal affair. Iranians are to decide what should be the future of this country. It's a fundamental principle. And number two, any security spillover effect should be contained. All of those connectivity projects are very important for Azerbaijan. We discussed them last time when I was your guest here. We talked about Rasht-Astara railway connection. We talked about Aras corridor connecting, which is an alternative to Zengezur corridor, connecting Azerbaijan's mainland with Nakhchivan via Iranian territory. All of these assets and projects are incredibly important for Azerbaijan. Let me be absolutely honest and clear with you. Of course, naturally, Islamic Republic of Iran and modern Azerbaijani state have not enjoyed the best of relations over the past 30, 35 years. And in many ways, Iran does see Azerbaijan, modern Azerbaijan, secular Azerbaijan, as danger to its own national interests.
But look, and things have been a bit calmer more recently.
You're right. With the election of the current president, President Pezeshkian, who is of Azerbaijani origin, and that matters a great deal in terms of chemistry, in terms of the sense of affinity with Azerbaijan, things have changed. And I think it would be fair to say, in line with rational politics, Azerbaijan and certain sections of modern Islamic Republic of Iran, President Pezeshkian and people surrounding him have tried to make sure there's a predictability. His visit to Azerbaijan last year was incredibly important. President Pezeshkian also attended the summit in Khankandi, Economic Cooperation Organization's summit, on the 4th of July, if memory serves me correctly. That was the 17th summit of that organization. And there are certain common interests in terms of Aras corridor and trade turnover and so forth. There is a reasonable space within the confines of which Azerbaijan and Iran could work and cooperate. On the other hand, Iran, Islamic Republic of Iran, has consistently opposed the Zengezur corridor, considered Zengezur corridor as its red line, because Iran always wanted Azerbaijan to be reliant on Iran to be able to get to its Nakhchivan exclave. But things are changing. Allow me to add one more point. As I said, Iran is a fascinating country. It has had a fantastic journey throughout the centuries. Azerbaijanis of Iran played a crucial role in the evolution of Iranian identity. Azerbaijanis were ruling classes of Iran. Azerbaijanis are not some sort of a secondary or third class minority there. Azerbaijanis played an important role in defining what Iran is all about, but they lost their position there. As I said, centuries ago, they were a dominant force, and now they are secondary. Now, they're not allowed to study their own language. Their cultural rights have been curbed over the centuries, but their centrality to the Iranian polity is still very much there.
Is there any sense in which Azerbaijanis in Iran could expect to be treated better or worse under this proposed regime, proposed government of the new, as it's being put, Shah?
Yes. Well, let's see what will happen there. I'm not entirely sure, with all due respect to our guest, with whom you converse very extensively, that those Iranians who form Iranian diaspora abroad have a clear sense of what is happening in their own homeland. And to what extent were they talking about West-oriented Iran, which will have absolutely fantastic relations with Israel, and that everybody there likes Donald Trump, is real reflection of what's happening there. I think Iranians have historically been very hostile towards foreign intervention. We remember 1905, 1911. We remember the Reza Pahlavi's own, the former Shah's, the one who was deposed in 1979, own reflections about the British meddling, which they always despised, even under Pahlavis. I don't think that any foreign intervention model would work in Iran. And that is also perfectly applicable to what happened in 1953 when Mossadegh government was overthrown, and because Mossadegh wanted to nationalize the oil sector, and actually Britain and US, for very sound reasons, were against it. But naturally they were not thinking about Iran, they were thinking about their own geostrategic interests. We live in the real world, of course. Therefore, my feeling is that there is a detachment or some sort of disconnect between what those outside Iran are talking about. Naturally, there is one sizable, definable portion of Iranian society which may potentially like and advocate for the return of the Shah, but I think their footprint there back in Iran is incredibly limited. Azerbaijan should consider their position very carefully. I know many Azerbaijanis in Iran who, first of all, they consider themselves as Iranians, and then only Azerbaijanis. Bearing in mind their historic role, this is perfectly understandable. But is it within the realm of possibility that, as a result of certain changes within the Islamic Republic of Iran, there will be a governance change, and Azerbaijanis, as constituent elements of Iranian society, will get a more palpable agency, influencing Iran's foreign policy agenda? That is indeed within the realm of possibility, but it's not going to happen anytime soon, because the current rulers of Iran, with all due respect to them, they effectively cleanse the political spectrum from anybody who might argue otherwise. Iran is a very unique country. They've got their own sort of a democracy within certain limits. There's a parliament, there's an elected president, but the key power centers are really revolving around the supreme leader. Supreme leader is not elected. Iran has had only two supreme leaders from 1979 to 1989, Khomeini and then Ali Khamenei after 1989. And IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, is a key body, and therefore these are not elected bodies, what I'm effectively trying to say. So this mixture of elected institutions controlled by unelected bodies has been one of the fundamental strengths of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But now it looks like that tensions are escalating. It's very difficult to say what will happen. This government, this particular governance model has seen worse 3-4 years ago. And for any definable change to happen, I suppose we need to look into the confluence of a number of circumstances which should be there simultaneously. Duration, it should continue, carry on. 2 weeks, not good enough, really. It should carry on. It should create a critical mass when the frictions within the governing elites should reach such a level then that some of the people which belong to the IRGC and other sectors should leave that system. Defection should happen, and there must be some form of foreign intervention. I don't think without foreign intervention of some sort it will happen, but it is also true to say, and this is to the credit of Iranian people, they have always, historically, despised foreign intervention.
It's very interesting, as you say, a very, very delicate position for Azerbaijan to have to play diplomatically. Now, for all the criticism of the existing government in Tehran, one of the things that they have been very sophisticated at is diplomacy.
Yep.
Subtlety, dexterity, we've
Yes.
spoken about it
Yes,
at
indeed.
length on this show. Do you think there's any danger, though, that as the pressure increases, as this crisis unfolds, that actually that sophistication starts to wane and we start to get a sense of, look, you're either with us or against us, a call for a response from allies?
Indeed, it is indeed within the realm of possibility. As you said, Iran has got very interesting, intricate structure. One of the things which is very challenging for anybody dealing with Iran, not just Azerbaijan, you've got a number of power centers, and quite often one section of the government, president himself, may be in favor of good relations with Azerbaijan, whereas those close to supreme leader may derail that constructive spirit. And that is a fundamental challenge regarding Iran. The system there has shown its resilience, but many analysts, including those who deserve ultimate respect, say this time it feels a bit different. It feels like we are much closer to that critical mass, which has always eluded protesters. I suppose the extent of economic inflation, the rising, the deteriorating standards of life, and also what happened during summer 2025 when the US actively did something which Iranians were not ready to digest. United States attacked Iran on the ground. Iran's nuclear assets were targeted. This is something which has never happened before in this form and shape. And cumulative impact of internal stagnation and genuine economic problems and inflation and so forth, and genuine unrest which involves people from bazaar, entrepreneurs, and also students and many other people, and plus, of course, international situation, Trump factor, cumulatively, make the current juncture incredibly different. I'm not saying that critical mass has emerged. There is a need for second wave of protests to achieve that purpose, but on this occasion it does indeed look very different, and that's the reason why the former Crown Prince is so optimistic about the future of his return. It is, many would say, this could be his last battle, the opportunity to come back. But although international situation looks very different, an internal situation, the reality is that Iranians do not like foreign intervention, plus no one should take for granted that monarchy is loved by the preponderant majority of Iranians. In fact, it is very much despised. Despised to the extent that I would say Islamic Republic of Iran, with all of its problems, and Pahlavi monarchy, when it comes to the categorization, are somewhere very similar to each other in that categorization.
Very interesting indeed, as always. Orkan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's head now to our correspondents in their regions, and we start with Georgia, where the Prime Minister has departed for Abu Dhabi, where he will take part in the Abu Dhabi Sustainable Development Week Summit. Now, the forum focuses on cooperation, investment and innovation, bringing together global political and business leaders. Our very own Nini Nikolashvili has more.
Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze will participate in the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week Summit, hosted by the United Arab Emirates from January 13 to 15. The summit brings together the heads of government, senior officials and business leaders to discuss sustainable development and large-scale investment. Within this setting, the Georgian Prime Minister is scheduled to take part in a thematic panel focused on the Middle Corridor, a transport and energy route linking Europe and Asia that has become central to Georgia's external political and economic narrative. According to the government administration, Kobakhidze is also expected to hold meetings with the representatives of international investment companies. The visit stands out as Georgia's first high-level diplomatic engagement in recent weeks amid a period marked by low international visibility and limited bilateral activity. Georgia has consistently promoted the Middle Corridor as a strategic alternative for regional transit and energy flows, positioning itself as a logistical bridge between East and West. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze is traveling with a delegation that includes the ministers of Foreign Affairs, Economy, Environment and Agriculture, Justice, and the head of the government administration. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
In a new report, the International Organization for Migration says millions of Afghans who have returned home over the past 2 years are struggling to rebuild their lives, facing unemployment, housing insecurity and limited access to basic services, adding that 1 in 4 Afghans returning from Iran and Pakistan have been able to settle in their intended destinations. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more details now from Kabul.
The latest IOM assessment paints a sobering picture of life after return for Afghan families who came back from Iran and Pakistan since late 2023. According to the report, around 2.4 million Afghans returned during this period, many of them forced back by deportation campaigns. But for a large number, coming home has not meant stability. The survey shows that only 11% of adult returnees are fully employed, while more than half of the households cannot cover their basic monthly expenses. Many families are relying on loans, donations, or even selling their belongings just to survive. Housing has emerged as one of the biggest challenges. Nearly 1 in 5 returnee households are already facing eviction, with women-headed households particularly vulnerable. Access to services is another major concern. More than half of returnee households lack reliable electricity and heating, while large numbers struggle to reach healthcare and education. Despite these hardships, the report notes some resilience. Most returnees say they feel relatively safe in their communities, and nearly 8 in 10 plan to stay where they are. Still, economic pressure remains the main driver, pushing others to consider moving again, either inside Afghanistan or abroad. IOM warns that without sustained support, the fragile reintegration of returnees could deepen poverty, fuel further displacement, and strain already overstretched host communities. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Uzbekistan plans to increase the share of electric vehicles to 10% of all passenger cars by 2030, while authorities move to improve urban air quality, particularly in Tashkent, which has struggled with pollution in recent years.
Under the updated Uzbekistan 2030 strategy, the share of electric vehicles in the country's passenger car fleet is set to rise sharply over the next 5 years. Officials aim for nearly 1 in 10 cars to be electric by 2030, up from less than 2% today. As of October 1st, 2025, more than 86,100 electric cars were registered nationwide, with almost 65,000 in Tashkent alone. The push is linked to public health and environmental goals. In 2025, Tashkent was repeatedly cited among cities with the poorest air quality, with vehicle emissions and winter fuel use contributing to elevated levels of fine particulate matter. To encourage uptake, the state will offer subsidized auto loans, 12% for domestically produced electrics and 16% for imports, as well as credit support for businesses to build charging stations. The government will also subsidize part of cost of electricity above a baseline rate at public chargers, and residents using electric cars for taxi services will receive additional incentives. Officials say wider adoption of electric vehicles could help reduce pollution in urban centers. It is Yulia Japo reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us again tomorrow evening for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.